Hey everybody, this is Metamither. Today we're going to be talking about the Infrasonic Audio Warp Core Oscillator. It's a stereo Eurorack module that uses phase distortion and phase modulation. This is a pretty rare type of synthesis that isn't really seen too much these days. If you remember back to the Casio CZ line of synthesizers, they use phase distortion synthesis. I used to have the CZ 5000 back in high school, but I never really felt like I unlocked it or understood phase distortion synthesis. So this is an awesome module from Infrasonic Audio, which presents this super easy to understand and very immediate module for crafting sounds really quickly. All right, so at a glance, these are Warp Core's main features. It has a stereo signal path, the ability to select any 2 of 8 algorithms, which are routed in serial, which gives you a possible 64 total combinations. There's phase modulation with adjustable frequency ratios that can be applied before or after the phase distortion, an external phase modulation input. There are 2 different thickness parameters that reinforce the fundamental frequency and/or 1 octave down, providing a stereo or unison effect. And there's a tune lock ensuring you won't inadvertently change your intended tuning. Before we go in depth with each algorithm, let's briefly talk about the theory behind phase distortion. This will help you understand how the modes are transforming your sine wave. As the manual states, phase distortion is a digital synthesis method which creates wave shapes by affecting the phase of an oscillator. So what does that mean? If you remember way back to trigonometry, a sine wave is defined in terms of periodic movement around a circle, as shown in this little video. The angle between our rotating line and the x-axis are measured as phase. The phasor can be drawn as an upward ramp that resets as the cycle of the sine wave starts over. Phase distortion distorts that red phasor so it's not a straight line, which in turn distorts the sine wave into more timbrally interesting and complex shapes. That's what the 8 transforms on Warp Core provide. You see here in the bent example, which is one of the transforms, the phasor line increases before tapering off, which means that the resulting sine wave shape gets through the initial part of the phase cycle quicker. Okay, that's enough math class. Let's get into some sound examples. All right, so we're going to start here at the center, which is the LED display column. This center area gives you a lot of visual feedback as you use the module, most prominently telling you which algorithm you've got selected. As you can see right here, I've got a red square, but as I press the button, you'll see it goes into the different algorithms. And I can do that as well on the right side here. And you see the red square changes. I'm going to keep them both at 1 for now. So you have 2 opportunities to warp your signal, which is A and B. You have 8 different algorithms to choose from, which is denoted by the blue and red lights, which are warp A and B. And you can swap them really easily by pressing both buttons down. So this is a really great way to see how warp A and B affect each other when they're swapped. Warp A and B work in series, so you're going to get different results when you switch them. Just like if you're using guitar pedals, putting reverb before distortion is going to be different than putting reverb after distortion. With the 2 combinations of the 8 algorithms, that gives you a total of 64 possible combinations of warp A and B. Okay, so for this demo, I have the Oxy 1 sequencer off screen playing this really basic progression into the Warp Core. I have the Warp Core expander as well, which gives me a dedicated envelope, which turns this into a full voice. The connection is made on the back of the module, which means less patching and less nonsense. I've got this going into the Ikari filter, but everything is set in neutral positions, so we're not hearing its effect, but maybe we'll use that a little bit later. I've also got the attenuation set here in the middle so it's not being affected, and I've got the Warp A and Warp B all the way down. So basically what we're hearing right now is just a straight sine wave. Also, I'll talk about these later, but for now, this switch is set to the off position. Also, my PM amount is all the way counterclockwise. So these 8 modes are actually divided into 3 categories, which are 3 wave shaping, 3 overtone, and 2 effects. The first one that we're on right now is called bend, which, as we saw in the manual, implies an increasingly exponential curve to the phasor, resulting in an output that begins to roughly resemble a rounded pulse wave. So let's hear what that sounds like when we turn up Warp A. The second one is called Kink, which is similar to bend but shapes the phasor using 2 sloped line segments. Let's hear that. So it's got a bit of a brighter sound to it, especially at the upper regions there. The third mode is called pinch, which pinches the phaser toward the center of its period, which gives a sort of pulse wave modulation. This thins out the sound of the oscillator typically, so remember that later. We can add a sub-octave reinforcement to thicken up our tone again. See how it's getting all thin at the top there? All right, that leads us into the 3 overtone modes. The first one is called sync, which is a hard sync sound that you'll find on a lot of synthesizers. This hard syncs the phaser to a virtual frequency, increasing from the phaser's fundamental frequency by wrapping it back around to 0. Lots of sweet spots with that one. Next, we've got fold, which is a wave folding mode, which wraps the phaser back on itself. The last overtone mode is called scream, which applies a sine function to the phaser. That leads us into the 2 effect modes. The first one is called crush. This algorithm emulates a kind of bit crushing effect. Sort of similar to the sync sound as well. I feel like at the top it really doesn't sound like bit crushing, it's kind of its own thing. And finally, we have the offset mode, which adds a constant offset to the phaser, which can result in subtle or extreme pitch wobbling. In this example, I'm using my favorite modulation source, the Zadar, to modulate warp A. You can see I have it there, and we're hearing a little bit of that kind of warbling. All right, so those are all 8 of the distortion modes, but what do they sound like together? Crazy how different the sound is when you swap them. All right, awesome. Let's get the Akari filter in there. Sounds great. All right, there's some other controls at the bottom of the module that give you additional shaping capabilities. The windowing mode switch underneath the first button applies a type of amplitude modulation that can be useful in reducing excess buzziness in your signal. So we can choose to have this off. We can apply a downward sawtooth wave or a triangle wave. So that's off. Sawtooth. Triangle. Sawtooth. And off. You've got a phase modulation knob here on the top right, so you can see what that sounds like. And you can see the green LEDs lighting up. So you can actually have the phase modulation happen before or after the warping. So let's put it before. See how different that sounds? That sounds really different. Super different. Awesome. And don't forget, you also have an external phase modulation input, so you can mess around with the oscillator of your choice. The other shift functions are conveniently written in italics underneath the knob's main function. For example, holding the left button and turning tune adjusts your pitch and semitones. If you hold the left button down and rotate Warp A, you'll adjust your octaves. Warp Core goes up 7 octaves, and you'll see the octaves light up as you change the values. This is also a good time to talk about Tune Lock, which is one of my favorite features of this module. And honestly, I wish more modules had this feature. So when I'm going into a live performance situation, I really need to make sure that my oscillators are all in tune. And this gives me so much more confidence when I'm going into that live show. Many oscillators have this huge coarse knob, which pretty much means it's going to get knocked out of whack, maybe in transport, or maybe you just hit it by mistake. To enable Tune Lock, press and hold both of the buttons for a few seconds, and you'll see Warp Core light up, telling you that the Tune Lock status has been changed. Right there. So now when I try to change tune, you'll see that these angry red lights are telling me that I can't change it. That said, you can still change octaves. So yeah, as I said, this is a pretty unique offering in the Eurorack world, and it just gives me so much more confidence when I'm going into a live situation. So if you hold the right button and turn Warp B, this increases the amount of detune in your sound up to 75 cents. You can actually see the green LEDs. When they're least detuned, they're together. And as the signal detunes, they're further apart. If you hold the left button down and turn the Warp B knob, this mixes in a pure sine wave at the fundamental frequency or an octave below. So this is another great way to get a thicker sound. You can hear that nice sine wave underneath there. So let's have a last little jam out. Let's modulate the PM amount as well. Awesome. All right, I hope you enjoyed that overview of the Infrasonic Audio Warp Core Oscillator. If you're interested, you can check it out for free in VCV Rack. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. See ya.